Hey everyone, it's Jake here, and I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my heart for months now. You probably noticed I vanished from social media completely, and honestly, I never thought I'd have the courage to share this story. But sitting here today, looking back at everything that happened, I realized this might be the most important video I'll ever make. 2 years ago, I was living what everyone thought was the perfect life. Picture this: 2.3 million followers across all platforms, my YouTube channel hitting 500K subscribers, brand deals that paid more in a month than most people make in a year. I had this incredible apartment in downtown LA with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a Tesla in the garage, and a closet full of designer clothes that brands were literally throwing at me. Every morning, I'd wake up to thousands of notifications, comments telling me I was living their dream life, DMs from fans saying my content inspired them, collaboration requests from other creators. The rush was intoxicating. I felt like I was on top of the world, like nothing could touch me. My daily vlogs were getting millions of views, my lifestyle content was trending regularly, and I genuinely believed I had cracked the code to happiness. But here's what nobody saw behind those perfectly curated posts and that million-dollar smile. Here's what I never showed you in any of those morning routine videos or those sunset shots from my balcony. I was drowning, and I didn't even realize it yet. The thing about being an influencer that nobody talks about is how every single moment of your life becomes content. I couldn't grab coffee without thinking about the lighting for a story. I couldn't have a bad day without worrying about how it would affect my engagement. Even my relationships started feeling performative. Was I hanging out with friends because I enjoyed their company, or because they looked good in my vlogs? I remember this one specific morning, about 6 months before everything fell apart. I was filming my usual morning routine, you know the one, talking about gratitude and positive mindset while making my green smoothie. The camera was rolling, my ring light was perfectly positioned, and I was giving you guys my biggest, brightest smile. But inside, I felt completely empty. It was like I was watching myself perform from outside my own body. The comments section, which used to be my favorite part of creating content, started feeling overwhelming. Don't get me wrong, 99% of you were absolutely incredible. Your support, your kindness, your stories about how my content helped you through tough times, that meant everything to me. But that 1% of negativity began consuming my thoughts. Every critical comment felt like a personal attack. Every suggestion that I was fake or privileged cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I started having these moments where I'd sit in my car after filming, just staring at my phone, wondering who I really was underneath all the followers and likes. Was Jake the person, or was Jake just a brand I'd created? When I looked in the mirror, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The pressure to constantly create, to always be on, to maintain this image of perfection was suffocating me slowly. I was posting 3 times a day across different platforms, responding to hundreds of comments, attending events every night, collaborating with other creators, managing sponsorship deals. My team kept pushing for more content, more engagement, more growth. The algorithm demanded consistency, and I was terrified that taking even one day off would make everything I'd built crumble. But the worst part wasn't the pressure or the exhaustion. The worst part was realizing I'd lost touch with why I started creating content in the first place. I began making videos because I wanted to connect with people, to share real experiences, to maybe help someone feel less alone in this crazy world. Somewhere along the way, it became about numbers, metrics, and maintaining an image that was slowly killing the real me. What I'm about to tell you next changed everything. There was this one comment buried among thousands of others that would eventually lead to the most unexpected journey of my life. A simple message from someone named Emma that said something so genuine, so real, that it stuck with me even when everything else felt fake. Little did I know, that comment would become the thread that would unravel my entire carefully constructed world, and ultimately, save me from losing myself completely. But that's a story for the next chapter, and trust me, you're not going to believe what happened next. So there I was, living this supposedly perfect life, but something was shifting inside me that I couldn't ignore anymore. Remember that comment from Emma I mentioned? It kept echoing in my mind during the darkest moments. While thousands of people were telling me how lucky I was, how perfect my life looked, her words felt different, real, honest. And that terrified me because it made me realize how disconnected I'd become from genuine human interaction. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was supposed to film a sponsored post for this luxury skincare brand, something that would pay me $15,000 for 30 seconds of content. I set up my ring light, positioned my phone, and started recording my usual energetic introduction. But halfway through, I just stopped. My hands started shaking, my chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe properly. I was having a panic attack, right there in my perfectly lit bathroom, surrounded by products I didn't even use, pretending to live a life that felt increasingly foreign to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, supposedly teaching people about self-care and wellness, while I was falling apart behind the camera. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept scrolling through my old content, looking at this person who looked like me but felt like a stranger. In my early videos, you could see something genuine in my eyes, a spark of authenticity that had slowly dimmed over the years. When did I stop being Jake and start being this polished version of what I thought people wanted to see? The next few weeks were a blur of forced smiles and manufactured enthusiasm. Every video felt like I was lying to you, to myself, to everyone who trusted me with their time and attention. The algorithm kept demanding more. My team kept scheduling more collaborations, more brand deals, more appearances. I felt like I was on a treadmill that was moving faster than I could run. I started avoiding my friends because every conversation felt like potential content. I stopped going to places I actually enjoyed because they weren't aesthetic enough for my feed. I was living my life through the lens of what would perform well, what would get engagement, what would maintain my image. The person I used to be was disappearing, and I was too scared to admit it. The final straw came during a collaboration with 3 other influencers. We were filming this elaborate morning routine video at this mansion in the hills, and everyone was so focused on getting the perfect shot that nobody was actually present in the moment. I watched these people I considered friends treat each other like props in their content, and I realized I was doing the same thing. That night, I sat in my car outside that mansion for 2 hours, just crying. Not the kind of tears you shed when something specific happens, but the deep, soul-crushing kind that comes from realizing you've lost yourself completely. I thought about Emma's comment again, about how she said my content helped her when she was feeling down. How could I help anyone when I was drowning myself? I drove home and did something I'd never done before. I turned off my phone completely. Not on silent, not do not disturb, completely off. For the first time in years, I sat in complete silence with my own thoughts, and what I discovered scared me more than any hate comment ever could. I didn't know who I was anymore without the constant validation of likes and comments. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I picked up my phone, opened Instagram, and posted one simple story. No perfect lighting, no carefully crafted caption, just me looking exhausted and broken, saying I needed to take a break to find myself again. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I deleted every single social media app from my phone. My team called me frantically. Brand partners were confused. Other creators were asking what happened. But for the first time in years, I didn't care about the business implications or the potential damage to my brand. I packed a single bag with clothes, got in my car, and started driving with no destination in mind. I drove for hours, then days, sleeping in my car, eating at random diners, talking to strangers who had no idea who I was online. It was the most freedom I'd felt since before I became Jake the influencer. But I had no idea that while I was running away from my old life, someone was already looking for me. Someone who would change everything about how I understood connection, authenticity, and what it really means to impact another person's life. What happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest ripples, and that one genuine comment from a stranger could become the lifeline I never knew I needed. After driving aimlessly for 3 days, surviving on gas station coffee and whatever food I could grab without having to interact with too many people, I found myself in this tiny town called Millfield, Oregon. Population 847, according to the weathered sign at the town limits. No Starbucks, no trendy restaurants, no influencer houses with perfect lighting. Just mountains, endless trees, and the kind of silence that makes you confront everything you've been running from. I pulled into the parking lot of what looked like the town's only motel, this old-fashioned place with a neon sign that flickered between vacancy and no vacancy. The owner, this elderly woman named Ruth, looked at me like I was some lost city kid who'd taken a wrong turn, which honestly wasn't far from the truth. She rented me a small cabin behind the motel for $400 a month. $400. In LA, that wouldn't even cover my daily coffee budget from those fancy places I used to frequent for content. The cabin was tiny, maybe 500 square feet, with a bed, a small kitchen, and a bathroom that had seen better decades. But something about it felt safe. There were no ring lights, no camera equipment, no pressure to document every moment. For the first time in years, I could just exist without performing. The first week was brutal. I kept reaching for my phone to post about this new experience, to share the sunset over the mountains, to create content about finding yourself in small-town America. But there were no apps to open, no audience to perform for. I was alone with my thoughts, and honestly, it was terrifying. Who was I without the constant validation of strangers on the internet? I spent those early days walking through town, which took about 15 minutes from end to end. There was Murphy's hardware store, where paint cans sat in the window like they'd been there since the 1980s. Betty's Diner, where the coffee was strong and the pie was homemade. A small library that doubled as the community center. A post office where everyone knew each other's business. It was like stepping into a different world, one where people looked you in the eye when they talked and conversations weren't interrupted by notification sounds. After burning through most of my savings on takeout and feeling increasingly isolated, I realized I needed a job. The idea of Jake the influencer asking for work at a hardware store felt surreal, but Murphy, the owner, was surprisingly kind. He was this weathered man in his 60s who'd never heard of social media and couldn't care less about my previous life. He just needed someone who could lift heavy things and wasn't afraid of getting their hands dirty. My first day was humbling in ways I never expected. I couldn't figure out the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. I mixed up paint codes and accidentally sold someone the wrong size nails. But Murphy was patient, teaching me like I was his grandson learning the family business. There was something deeply satisfying about helping someone find exactly what they needed to fix their broken fence or paint their kitchen. The townspeople slowly warmed up to me. Mrs. Patterson, who owned the general store, started teaching me how to make apple pie from scratch. Not for content, not for a cooking video, just because she enjoyed sharing something she loved. Tom, the local mechanic, showed me how to change my own oil, laughing at my soft city hands, but never making me feel stupid for not knowing basic car maintenance. For the first time in years, I was having real conversations. Not networking conversations where everyone was calculating what they could get from each other, but genuine human connections. People asked how I was doing and actually waited for an answer. They shared stories about their families, their struggles, their small victories. Nobody cared about my follower count or my brand partnerships. They cared about whether I was a decent person who showed up when I said I would. The healing happened slowly, like watching a time-lapse of a plant growing. I started sleeping better without the constant anxiety of checking engagement metrics. My hands stopped shaking when I wasn't holding a phone. I rediscovered simple pleasures like reading actual books, cooking meals without photographing them, watching sunsets without thinking about how they'd look on my story. But the most profound change was internal. I began remembering who Jake was before he became a brand. I remembered loving photography because it captured beautiful moments, not because it generated likes. I remembered enjoying conversations because they connected me to other people, not because they could become content. I was slowly becoming human again instead of a content creation machine. 3 months into my new life, I thought I'd found my answer. Maybe this was it. Maybe Jake the influencer was dead, and Jake the hardware store employee was who I was meant to be. I was genuinely happy for the first time in years, living simply, working with my hands, connecting with real people in real ways. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Because while I was in Millfield learning how to be human again, someone was looking for me. Someone who remembered that comment I mentioned. Someone who'd noticed my disappearance and refused to let it go unnoticed. Someone who was about to prove that genuine connections can transcend digital spaces, and that sometimes, one person caring enough to find you can change everything. What I didn't know was that my quiet new life was about to be disrupted in the most beautiful way possible. Now I need to tell you about Emma. And this is where the story gets absolutely incredible. 3 years ago, when I was still posting regularly, and my life looked perfect from the outside, she left a comment on one of my videos about dealing with anxiety. It wasn't anything elaborate or attention-seeking, just a simple message that said, "Your content always brightens my day when I'm feeling down. Thank you for being real." In a sea of millions of interactions, thousands of comments on every post, hers somehow stood out. Maybe it was the word real that caught my attention. Because even then, part of me was struggling with authenticity. Or maybe it was just the genuine warmth that came through in those few words. Whatever it was, I actually took the time to heart her comment and reply with a personal thank you. Most creators would have just liked it and moved on. But something about Emma's message felt different. When I disappeared from social media completely, most people probably assumed I was taking a regular break or dealing with some temporary drama. Influencers come and go, take hiatuses, rebrand themselves. It's part of the business. But Emma noticed immediately, and more importantly, she sensed something was deeply wrong. She told me later that she could see the pain in my last few posts, even though I thought I was hiding it well. She noticed how my smile had stopped reaching my eyes, how my usual enthusiasm felt forced, how my content had become increasingly hollow despite the perfect production value. While millions of followers were consuming my content without really seeing me, Emma was actually paying attention to the person behind the posts. So this incredible girl started what she called Operation Find Jake. I'm not kidding when I tell you she approached this like a detective solving the most important case of her life. She created actual spreadsheets, tracking every clue from my old content. She analyzed my travel vlogs frame by frame, looking for patterns in the places I visited. She made lists of coffee shops I'd featured, restaurants I'd reviewed, hiking trails I'd documented. Emma reached out to local businesses I'd tagged in old posts, calling them under the pretense of planning her own trip to those areas. She contacted hotels where I'd stayed, asking if they'd seen someone matching my description. Most people thought she was crazy, some hung up on her, but she didn't give up. She was determined to find me, not for clout or content, but because she genuinely cared about my well-being. The dedication was unreal. She spent her evenings after work going through years of my content, taking screenshots of any location hints, cross-referencing them with maps and travel websites. She remembered that I'd mentioned loving small mountain towns in several videos, so she started focusing her search on rural areas in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. For months, she called hardware stores, coffee shops, diners, and rental agencies in tiny towns throughout the Pacific Northwest. Can you imagine these conversations? A young woman calling random businesses asking if they'd seen a former influencer who disappeared from social media. Most people probably thought she was either stalking me or completely delusional, but Emma was smart about it. She didn't mention my online presence or use my social media name. She just described me physically and asked if anyone had seen someone new in town who seemed like they might be going through a difficult time. She was protecting my privacy even while trying to find me, which shows you the kind of person she is. Then she got her breakthrough. She called Murphy's Hardware in Millfield, and when she described me to Murphy, he knew exactly who she was talking about. This old-school guy who barely understood what social media was perfectly described his new employee, who seemed like he was running from something but was a hard worker and a decent person. Emma could have driven straight to Millfield and confronted me right then. She could have shown up at the hardware store and blown up my quiet new life. But she didn't. She understood that I'd run if I felt cornered or exposed. Instead, she did something that still amazes me to this day. She got a job at the coffee shop across the street from Murphy's Hardware. Before we continue with this absolutely mind-blowing story, if you're enjoying this and want to hear how it all ends, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you're not going to believe what happens next. Also, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt the need to completely disconnect from social media? I read every single comment, and your stories mean everything to me. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear this story. This girl literally moved to a town of 847 people just to be near someone she'd only interacted with through a single comment exchange. For weeks, she'd come into the hardware store buying random things she didn't need, studying me, making sure I was safe, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal herself. What happened when she finally did will change how you think about human connection forever. Emma's dedication was beyond anything I could have imagined. She didn't just move to Millfield. She completely transformed her life to find me. She left her job in Portland, broke her lease, and convinced the owner of Millfield's only coffee shop to hire her, all based on the hope that she could help someone she'd never actually met. The level of compassion and determination that takes is something I still can't fully wrap my head around. For 3 weeks, she became part of my daily routine without me knowing who she really was. Every morning before work, I'd stop by the coffee shop for what had become my usual order, a simple black coffee, and whatever pastry looked good that day. Emma would be there behind the counter, this friendly girl with kind eyes who always seemed genuinely happy to see me. She'd ask how I was doing, make small talk about the weather or the town, never pushing for personal information, but always making me feel welcome. What I didn't realize was that she was carefully observing me, not in a creepy way, but with the concern of someone who genuinely cared about my well-being. She later told me she could see I was healing, but also that I was still carrying a lot of pain. She watched me interact with the other townspeople, saw how I was slowly coming back to life, but also noticed the moments when I'd get this distant look in my eyes. like I was remembering something that hurt. Then she started coming into the hardware store. At first it was innocent enough, buying light bulbs, gardening gloves, paint samples, the kind of random stuff that new residents might need. Murphy would joke that she was single-handedly keeping us in business with all her small purchases. I thought she was just a quirky local who was maybe fixing up an old house or something. But Emma was actually studying me in my work environment, seeing how I interacted with customers, watching me learn new skills, observing the way I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. She told me later that seeing me help an elderly man find the right screws for his porch repair, taking the time to explain the difference between wood screws and deck screws, showed her that I was rediscovering my capacity for genuine human connection. The breakthrough moment came on a Thursday that started as one of the worst days I'd had since arriving in Millfield. It was the anniversary of my father's death, something I hadn't talked about publicly during my influencer days, because grief doesn't fit neatly into content calendars. I was struggling that morning, moving through my routine like a zombie, trying to push down the memories and the guilt I felt about not being there when he passed because I was at some brand event. Emma came into the store around noon, ostensibly looking for picture-hanging hardware. I was behind the counter, probably looking as broken as I felt, when she approached with a small pack of wall anchors. As I rang up her purchase, she looked directly into my eyes and said something that made my world stop spinning. "Your content always brightens my day when I'm feeling down. Thank you for being real." The exact words from her comment 3 years ago. Word for word. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the cash register scanner. I just stared at her, my mouth open, trying to process what was happening. The hardware store, with its familiar smell of sawdust and metal, suddenly felt surreal, like I was in some kind of dream. "You're Emma," I whispered, and she nodded with tears in her eyes. I think I stopped breathing for a moment. This girl, this incredible human being, had spent months tracking me down, had uprooted her entire life, had moved to a town where she knew nobody, all because she cared about a stranger who disappeared from the internet. The magnitude of what she'd done hit me like a physical force. Murphy was in the back organizing inventory, so we were alone in the store. I came around the counter and just stood there looking at her. This person who'd somehow found me, when I didn't even know I wanted to be found. She was smaller than I'd imagined, with brown hair and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, but there was a strength in her presence that was unmistakable. "Why?" was all I could manage to say. She smiled through her tears and said, "Because your last few posts scared me. Because I could see you were drowning and nobody else seemed to notice. Because that comment I left wasn't just nice words, it was true. Your content did help me through some really dark times, and I couldn't just let you disappear without knowing you were okay." We talked for the rest of my shift, and then for hours after Murphy closed the store. She told me about her search, about the spreadsheets and phone calls, about how she'd convinced herself that finding me was the most important thing she could do with her time. She shared her own struggles with depression, how my videos about mental health had given her hope during her lowest moments, how she'd felt a genuine connection to the person she saw behind the camera. But what struck me most was that she wasn't there to drag me back to my old life. She wasn't trying to convince me to return to social media or capitalize on my disappearance for content. She just wanted to make sure I was safe, that I was healing, that I knew someone cared enough to look for me when I was lost. That conversation changed everything for me. Not because Emma solved all my problems or magically healed my trauma, but because she showed me something I'd forgotten existed. Genuine human connection that asks for nothing in return. She'd found me not for what I could give her, but simply because she believed I mattered as a person. What happened next would challenge everything I thought I knew about authenticity, purpose, and what it really means to impact someone's life. The weeks following Emma's revelation were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. She didn't try to change me or fix me or convince me to return to my old life. Instead, she simply became part of my world in Millfield, and somehow, everything felt more complete with her there. We developed this beautiful routine. She'd open the coffee shop at 6 in the morning, and I'd stop by before my shift at Murphy's. We'd talk about books she was reading, stories from customers, her observations about small-town life. She had this way of seeing magic in ordinary moments that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with creating content in the first place. Not for the metrics or the money, but for the simple joy of sharing human experiences. Emma never once asked me about my follower count or my brand deals, or when I might return to social media. She was genuinely interested in Jake the person, not Jake the influencer. She wanted to know about my childhood, my dreams before fame, what made me laugh, what kept me awake at night. For the first time in years, someone was curious about my thoughts rather than my platform. But what really changed me was watching how Emma interacted with the people of Millfield. She remembered everyone's coffee order, asked about their families, celebrated their small victories. Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter got into college, and Emma made a special cake to celebrate. Tom's truck broke down, and she organized the whole town to help him get back on his feet. She was creating real community, real connections, real impact in ways that had nothing to do with going viral. One evening, we were sitting on the porch of my cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Emma was telling me about a regular customer who'd been struggling with loneliness since his wife passed away, and how she'd started setting aside time each morning just to chat with him about his garden. As she spoke, I realized something profound was happening inside me. I was remembering why I'd started creating content in the first place. It wasn't for fame or money or validation. It was because I genuinely wanted to help people feel less alone in the world. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of that mission. But watching Emma live it out in real time was awakening something in me that I thought had died. "You know what's funny?" I said to her as the stars started appearing. "You're doing what I always thought I was doing online, but you're doing it in real life, with real people, in real time." She looked at me with that thoughtful expression she got when she was processing something important. "But Jake, you were doing that too." That comment I left wasn't just politeness. Your content genuinely helped me through some of the darkest periods of my life. You made me feel less alone when I was struggling with anxiety and depression. That's real impact. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on the negative aspects of my influencer life, the pressure, and the performance and the loss of authenticity, that I'd forgotten about the positive connections I'd made. Emma wasn't the only one who'd been helped by my content. There were thousands of messages over the years from people who said my videos had motivated them to start therapy, to leave toxic relationships, to pursue their dreams, to simply get through another day. But it didn't feel real anymore, I told her. By the end, I was just going through the motions, saying what I thought people wanted to hear. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed my entire perspective. "Maybe the problem wasn't that you were being fake. Maybe the problem was that you forgot you were allowed to be human. You thought you had to be perfect all the time. But the Jake who helped me was the one who shared his struggles, who admitted when he was scared or uncertain, who showed that it was okay to not have all the answers." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the messages I'd received over the years, all the people who'd said my content had made a difference in their lives. I'd dismissed most of them as superficial engagement. But what if they were real? What if, like Emma, there were people out there who'd genuinely been helped by my willingness to be vulnerable online? For the first time since leaving LA, I started thinking about my platform not as a burden or a performance, but as a tool for genuine connection. Emma had shown me that impact didn't require millions of followers or perfect content. It just required showing up authentically and caring about the people you were trying to reach. But I was still terrified. How could I return to social media without falling back into the same toxic patterns? How could I create content that felt genuine when the entire industry seemed designed to reward performance over authenticity? How could I trust myself to maintain the peace and self-awareness I'd found in Millfield? Emma sensed my internal struggle without me having to explain it. One morning, as she handed me my coffee, she said, "You know, Jake, maybe the question isn't whether you should go back. Maybe the question is how you can take what you've learned here and use it to help other people find what you found." That simple statement would become the foundation for the most important decision of my life. Emma's words about taking what I'd learned and using it to help others haunted me for weeks. Every morning, as I helped customers at Murphy's Hardware, I found myself thinking about the conversations we'd have. Real conversations about real problems. Mrs. Chen needed screws to fix her grandson's treehouse. David was looking for the right paint to restore his late father's fishing boat. These weren't content opportunities. They were human moments, and somehow they felt more meaningful than any brand partnership I'd ever done. But the real turning point came when Emma introduced me to her online world, and I discovered something that shattered every assumption I'd made about my disappearance. She showed me her laptop one evening, and I was shocked to see she'd been part of this incredible community of people who'd been genuinely worried about me. There were entire forum threads dedicated to my well-being, not gossip or speculation about drama, but real concern from real people who'd been impacted by my content. Messages like, "I hope Jake is okay, his videos helped me through my divorce," and "Jake's anxiety content literally saved my life. I just want him to know he's loved." There were hundreds of them, thousands even. People sharing stories about how my content had helped them through depression, breakups, career changes, family struggles. Emma had been quietly monitoring these conversations for months, and she showed me message after message from people who weren't angry that I'd disappeared, but who were genuinely worried about my mental health. They understood that something had been wrong, and instead of demanding my return, they were sending positive energy and hoping I was finding peace. "This is why I had to find you," Emma said, scrolling through pages of supportive messages. "These people love you, Jake. Not your brand, not your content, but you as a person. They could see you were struggling, and they wanted you to be okay more than they wanted you to post." Reading those messages broke something open inside me that I'd been keeping locked away. I'd convinced myself that my audience only cared about entertainment, that I was just another content creator in an endless scroll of distractions. But these messages revealed something different. I'd somehow created genuine connections with people who saw me as a real person going through real struggles. One message particularly stood out. A woman named Sarah had written, "Jake's video about feeling lost in your 20s came into my life exactly when I needed it. I was working a job I hated, living in a city that felt wrong, pretending to be happy on my own social media. Watching him admit he didn't have all the answers gave me permission to admit I was struggling too. I ended up moving back home, going back to school, and finding a career that actually fulfills me. I don't need Jake to come back and make more content. I just need him to know that his honesty changed my life." That's when I realized Emma had done more than find me physically. She'd helped me understand that my content had mattered in ways I'd never fully grasped. I'd been so focused on the performance aspects, the pressure to be perfect, that I'd lost sight of the genuine connections I'd been making. But Emma wasn't pushing me to return to social media. Instead, she was helping me understand that authenticity wasn't about the platform, it was about the intention behind the message. She'd seen me interact with the people of Millfield, watched me help customers at the hardware store, observed how I'd learned to be present in conversations without thinking about how they could become content. "You've learned how to be real again," she told me one night as we walked through downtown Millfield, all 2 blocks of it. "The question is, do you want to share that realness with a bigger audience, or are you content keeping it here?" The honest answer was that I missed helping people. I missed the messages from viewers who said my content had made a difference in their lives. But I was terrified of falling back into the same toxic patterns that had driven me away in the first place. Emma understood my fear because she'd watched me heal from the damage that lifestyle had caused. She'd seen me rediscover simple pleasures, learn to be present in moments without documenting them, develop genuine relationships without calculating their networking value. She knew how much I'd grown, but she also knew how much I'd lost by completely disconnecting from the people who'd genuinely been helped by my content. "What if you could do it differently this time?" she asked. "What if you could create content the way you live here in Millfield? Genuinely, without pressure, focused on real connection rather than metrics?" The idea was both terrifying and exciting. Could I return to social media without losing myself again? Could I create content that felt as authentic as my conversations with Murphy about wood stains, or my chats with Mrs. Patterson about her apple pie recipe? Emma suggested something that seemed impossible at first but gradually started making sense. What if I didn't return to my old life, but instead brought my new understanding of authenticity to my platform? What if I could share the lessons I'd learned in Millfield, the importance of real community, the value of slowing down, the beauty of genuine human connection? "You could help other people find what you found here," she said. "Not by telling them to disappear from social media, but by showing them how to use it as a tool for real connection, rather than performance." That conversation planted a seed that would grow into the most important decision of my life. But first, I had to figure out if I was strong enough to return to a world that had nearly destroyed me, armed with nothing but the lessons I'd learned in a tiny town and the support of someone who'd cared enough to find me when I was lost. The answer would surprise even me. So here I am, sitting in that same cabin in Millfield, where I learned to be human again, with Emma behind the camera probably rolling her eyes at how emotional I'm getting about this whole story. But this is where it all comes together, where everything Emma taught me about genuine connection finally made sense. The decision to come back wasn't easy. For weeks, I wrestled with the fear that returning to social media would undo all the healing I'd done. What if I fell back into the same toxic patterns? What if the pressure to perform consumed me again? What if I lost the peace I'd found in this tiny town where nobody cared about my follower count? But Emma helped me realize something crucial. The problem was never social media itself. The problem was that I'd forgotten why I started creating content in the first place. I'd gotten so caught up in the business of being an influencer that I'd lost sight of the human beings on the other side of the screen. Emma showed me that I could return, but differently. Not as Jake the perfect influencer with the flawless life and the sponsored morning routines, but as Jake the human being who'd learned that it's okay to struggle, to disappear when you need to heal, to prioritize your mental health over your metrics. My first video back was filmed right here in this cabin, with natural lighting and no script. Just me telling the truth about where I'd been and why I'd left. I was terrified to post it, convinced that my audience would be angry about my disappearance, or disappointed that I wasn't the same polished creator they'd followed before. But the response was overwhelming in the most beautiful way. Thousands of comments from people who said they'd been worried about me, who understood why I'd needed to step away, who were proud of me for choosing my well-being over my career. Messages from other creators who admitted they were struggling with the same pressures I'd faced. Stories from viewers who said my honesty about mental health had given them permission to seek help for their own struggles. Emma was right. My audience didn't want perfection from me. They wanted authenticity. They wanted to see someone who was brave enough to admit when they were struggling and strong enough to do something about it. Now, I create content differently. Sometimes I post from Millfield, sharing the simple beauty of small-town life and the lessons I've learned about community and connection. Sometimes I'm in LA, but I approach it with the mindset I developed here, focusing on real relationships rather than networking opportunities. I don't post every day anymore. I don't chase trends or worry about the algorithm. I create content when I have something genuine to share, when I think it might help someone feel less alone or encourage them to prioritize their own well-being. Emma didn't just find me when I was lost. She helped me understand that being found isn't about returning to where you were before. It's about integrating who you've become with who you used to be. She showed me that one genuine comment, one act of caring, one person willing to see you as a human being rather than a content creator, can change everything. The most incredible part of this story isn't that Emma tracked me down across multiple states and found me in a town of 847 people. It's that she did it because she genuinely cared about my well-being, with no expectation of anything in return. In a world where so many interactions feel transactional, where social media can make us feel more connected but somehow more alone, Emma proved that genuine human connection still exists. If this story has moved you, if you believe in the power of authentic connection and the importance of prioritizing mental health over metrics, then please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I promise to keep sharing real stories about real struggles and real growth. Like this video if you think everyone deserves someone who cares enough to find them when they're lost. Comment below and tell me about a time someone showed up for you when you needed it most, because I want to hear your stories and celebrate the people who've made a difference in your life. And please share this video because you never know who might need to hear that it's okay to step away when you're struggling, and it's okay to come back when you're ready. To everyone watching who feels overwhelmed by social media pressure, who's struggling with authenticity in a digital world, who feels like they're performing their life instead of living it, you're not alone. Take the break if you need it. Find your Millfield. Prioritize your well-being over your brand. The right people will understand, and the right opportunities will wait. And to Emma, who's probably cringing at how sentimental I'm being right now, thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Thank you for proving that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest impact. Thank you for showing me that coming back doesn't mean going backward. This is our story, and honestly, I can't wait to see what happens next.